All right, excellent. So now we are going to move on to Shaundra Toy.
Thanks, Mark, and
Yes.
welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay. So if you want to adjust your screen so that you can see speaker view too, it's a split screen. And we'll dive in here. All right. So my speech today is on freedom of speech, a discourse in daily life. And I have a question for you. What do Socrates and Jesus have in common? And the answer is, besides being historical figures, they also were very passionate about sharing ideas. So they were willing to die rather than stop sharing those ideas, which brings to mind a quote from Evelyn Beatrice Hall, who said, "I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Now, the First Amendment is our law that covers our freedom of speech. Now, there's some exceptions to that: perjury, defamation, to name a few, and incitement to illegal actions, such as you can't scream fire in a theater and have everybody stampede out and people get hurt trying to get to the exit. Lately, though, I've noticed on social media that if you disagree or share an idea or try to explore something in a different way, you get unfriended, unfollowed, deplatformed. It's cancel culture is what I would like to talk about today, because I think it threatens our very discourse and our First Amendment right. So to start with, I'm going to share a movie that I found groundbreaking. It was on Netflix, called The Social Dilemma. And it's a parade of tech engineers, ethicists, and educators. And specifically, I want to share a quote that was about 50 minutes in by Justin Rosenstein. And Justin said, and then you look over at the other side and you start to think, how can those people be so stupid? Look at all of this information that I'm constantly seeing, and how are they not seeing that same information? The answer is they're not seeing that same information, said Justin. We have to remember that social is not in the business of news. They're in the business of keeping us watching the screen. How do they do that? Well, sensation sells. And just like we'll slow down to watch a car wreck on the freeway, so does a sensational post. And with every like and every share, we build echo chambers. So what's the result? Well, they had this to share too, with some pure research illustrating the political polarization. If we look at this chart, the Republicans and Democrats were very close together. And if you look at it over time, they track together till 2008. And then in 2017, we find ourselves here, extremely divided. And let me toggle that back and forth for a second so you can see it. It's pretty profound. So why 2008? Well, that's when social media became much more mainstream, with mobile devices becoming prolific, and the whole thing took off. So a couple of questions I have to ask. First, does this drive the polarization, or are we just reflecting it? I think even in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica story, it might be a little bit of both. And if you're not familiar with Cambridge Analytica, you should watch The Great Hack on Netflix too. That's very good. The second question I have to ask is, what happens if we don't fix it? Do we just scream louder from our own echo chambers? Or do we do the work that it takes to foster communication? The last question I have is, how did we get here to begin with? And for that, I have to go into a little bit of history. You see, I work in print. And that Gutenberg press in that top left corner you see there, that was a sign of freedom. Because it was the first time, besides manually copying manuscripts, that we could mass produce something and distribute it for the public to see. And today, we have 4-story printing presses that spit out newspapers like crazy. And these trusted news sources are going out of business. Why? Because it sells. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. When sensation sells and you don't have to be a journalist at a big newspaper to publish the story, that's not awful. It means that you can have more journalistic information coming straight from the streets. But we have to be careful about what we consume. And this story is particularly personal for me because I have a daughter who's 20 years old, and she was very passionate about a lot of the political unrest going on and the things with George Floyd's death. And she posted this um, all cops are bastards post, and it was, polarizing. And I have a family of 5 law enforcement, so you can imagine how that went over. It's not always easy to tell what real news is. I mean, it used to be. You used to be able to see Lloyd's and then the New York Times, but it's harder now, you know? Technology's moving fast. And today, a week's worth of the New York Times is more than people used to see in their entire lifetime in the 18th century. 1992 is the day the first text was sent, and today we send more texts daily than there is population on the planet. So it's harder and harder to tell the difference. So how do we do this? Well, we have to ask, is this opening dialogue or is it shutting it down? And sometimes that's still hard to tell. So maybe taking a class with media studies or propaganda to help find that difference. Media literacy is something that I believe needs to happen early, 5th grade, maybe earlier. I remember in 6th grade clipping newspaper articles and taking them in to discuss with the class. With social media, it's a half-inch deep. How much can you shove into a meme or a character count for Twitter? It's hard to have good conversations when all you've got is headlines. And the challenge that I see is that we have to talk about it. The very definition of politically incorrect is that you're going to offend somebody with this discussion, this idea that you want to talk about. And so many of the today are controversial. They're controversial because they're messy. And we have to talk through them because that's how you get a path forward. That's how you draft legislation. That's how you build laws and find a way forward. So here's a couple of tips on how to foster discourse at your Thanksgiving dinner table this year. First, nothing is ever black and white. It's always gray area, especially if it's a controversial topic. For example, abortion. How many different areas does that affect? It affects education, fiscal policy, insurance, healthcare, religion, family values, biology, philosophy, social issues, economic issues, and human rights. You see, we tend to think in black and white, but this gray area is about the system that it's a. So get curious and think in systems. Try to look at things from a different perspective. The next tip I've got is try to listen and understand. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionally. And I have to go back to my favorite books, Getting to Yes by Robert Fisher and William Ury, who said we should be concerned with interests, not positions. And as an example, I have friends who are Republican, and all they want is for their small business to thrive, to survive, to not be burdened with taxes and bureaucracy. I also have friends who are Democrats, and they are really concerned about human rights. There's no reason those things have to be mutually exclusive. We can have both. And that was the point that Robert Fisher and William Ury tried to get to in their negotiating book, Getting to Yes. So listen, seek to understand. Maybe we can find a way forward with both. And the third point is agree to disagree with respect. Marriage and family counselors have been talking for years about how respect is a cornerstone with any relationship. And it's a sure sign that if it's missing, that you're headed for a divorce. And in a world of us versus them, who are those them anyway? Besides your neighbors, your family, your coworkers. United we stand, or divided, what's the alternative? Violence, crosses, the hemlock? In closing, I hope that this has expanded your thoughts about discourse, getting outside of your echo chambers, being curious and trying to understand respectfully another side to the story, because we, the people, every single one of us needs to be heard for this great country and our democracy to work. Thank you for the time today. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, text freedom to 22454 and I'd be happy to send you a copy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.